I just let Taryn again. That was good timing.
Yeah.
All right. And then let me see if I can also do, no, I can only go live on one. All right, let me go ahead and spotlight Ethan and Nithya. All right, are we ready to go? Yeah, all right. And if you guys can help with admitting people as we go, that'd be great. Hi, everybody, and welcome to our first candidate mobility debate of the 2024 election season. We are excited to have two candidates running for CD4, incumbent Councilmember Nithya Raman and Ethan Weaver. We also want to note that there are two other candidates running for this race. Unfortunately, we were not able to get a hold of them in time and incorporate them, but we did want to make that acknowledgement. We're going to give about 5 minutes of context and history on mobility and transportation in Los Angeles. Then we're going to go to candidate opening statements. Each candidate is going to have 2 minutes to make their opening statement. We will have a timer on the screen so the candidates will know when time's up, please stop speaking. And then we've got 9 Streets for All curated questions. The candidates will have 2 minutes each to answer those questions. Well, then I'm going to go to audience Q&A. There is a link at the top that we will also put in the chat. And you can ask your questions there. You can vote on other people's questions, and we will ask the most popular questions there. And then at the end, we will have 2 minutes per candidate for closing statements. So a little bit of context and history on Los Angeles. Some of these stats you may know, some of them you may not. So Los Angeles has so much gridlock that we actually lose $19 billion a year in lost productivity from people being stuck in traffic and not being able to get to where they need to go. So the way we live is actually really expensive. It's also really stressful. It's insane to say that nighttime domestic violence increases by 9% on extra heavy traffic days. So we're literally so stressed out that we're beating each other up. And the air is also terrible as a result of our car-dominated city. Just by living in Los Angeles, you smoke up to 4 cigarettes per day, just by breathing. That includes our kids, of course. We rank the worst in the nation for year-round ozone emissions and 5th worst for particle pollution. And we have one of the highest rates of childhood asthma in the country. So we're literally poisoning ourselves just by living with so many cars. It's also very dangerous. A pedestrian is killed once every 3 days in the city of Los Angeles. It's dangerous if you're in a wheelchair. 36% higher likelihood of being killed or injured in a crash. And our pedestrian fatality rate once every 3 days is 4 times the national average. So we don't just have a dangerous big city, but our big city is especially dangerous compared to other cities in the country. So our transportation system is mainly the bus. We are building out our rail system, but our public transportation system, the workhorse is the bus. And the average bus is now slower than an average cyclist, less than 11 miles per hour. And the opportunity as we see it is 2/3 of all trips made inside the city of LA are 5 miles or less, half are 3 miles or less. So we're not trying to replace all cars at Streets for All. We're not against cars, but we're against cars having all the space. And we think if we had a more balanced transportation system, we could actually convert some of the shorter trips in the neighborhood to modes other than the car. So when you put this all together, the way we see it, our system is kind of broken. And that's why we exist. We want to change it. We want a more balanced and livable city. And our city has had a lot of plans in the past to improve the situation. Just talking about bike lanes for a second, in 1977, the city released a plan for 673 miles of bike lanes. We installed 5 miles. In 1996, we had a new plan for 1,680 miles. We only installed 104. 14 years later, in 2010, about the same number of miles, 1,684, and we only installed 100 of those miles. And then in 2015, we passed the Mobility Plan 2035, 500 miles of protected bike lanes planned, only 37 miles have been implemented to date. So we love plans, we have great plans, we're not so great at implementation. And specific to bike lanes, the process is kind of insane. First of all, the pavement has to be perfect. So really the only opportunity to implement bike lanes is during the repaving schedule or as part of a capital project, but you can't just put bike lanes wherever they fit. A council office has to be interested in the project. The council office sets an arbitrary bar on outreach. Sometimes it's a lot, sometimes it's a little, it's up to the council office. And then LADOT spends months and sometimes years making the council office happy before they get the go-ahead to implement. And once the council member signs off, it's implemented. So it's literally a block by block, mile by mile approach that we think is pretty broken. This is the way the mobility plan looks across the city of Los Angeles. There are 256 miles of protected bike lanes planned, many more unprotected, and 208 miles of bus lanes planned. To date, 53 miles of the 53 miles of the 256 miles of protected bike lanes have been built, and 32 bus lane miles have been built. A lot of those in the last few years. In CD4 specifically, there's 2.4 miles of protected bike lanes planned and 57 miles of bike lanes planned, and there's 6.8 miles of bus lanes planned, mostly in Los Feliz. The ones that have been built, not necessarily all in the mobility plan, 1.2 miles of protected bike lanes, 28 miles of unprotected bike lanes, and 2.6 miles of bus lanes. Those are the first bus lanes in the valley, and they just went in. CD4 is pretty dangerous. The red line indicates the high injury network. These are the 6% of streets that cause 70% of injuries or deaths. And those dots that you see, the orange dots, are a death from traffic violence. Since 2015, 47 pedestrians have died, 4 cyclists have died, 23 drivers have died, and almost 1,000 people have had severe injuries in CD4. The reason that we started our ballot measure, Healthy Streets LA, is because we really want to fix the situation. We'll talk about the ballot measure later, but it will be on the March 5th, 2024 ballot. And our goal is to force the city to implement its own mobility plan whenever they repave a street. So we'll talk about that more in a minute. All right, we are now going to go to candidate opening statements. And in no particular order, I think alphabetical. Ethan, we're going to put you on the spot first. Go ahead whenever you're ready.
Great. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak with you. It's a real honor. So this is a topic, mobility and mass transit and traffic safety, that's very close to my heart. For 4 years in Los Angeles, I didn't own a car. I relied on the metro to get me everywhere. I walked the about half mile between my apartment and the Red Line. And that was my only mode of transportation. And on the one hand, I loved it because to the point made earlier, my life was so much less stressful than when I was driving. But then a couple things changed. And one of them was the pandemic. And coming through the pandemic, our metro lines, the safety on our metro lines has deteriorated significantly. I've been the victim of a battery on the metro line before. I've been surrounded by a lot of crime, and it's gotten really bad. And I've also almost been hit by a car in crosswalks going to and from mass transit. So this is an issue that's very close to my heart, and I'm excited to get to talk with you about it. And I hope as we go into this conversation, you'll see that the approach I take is one that's very much practical, very much looking at what is the world that we live in today and how do we move it forward. And so that's really where I want to focus my time today. And I'm really excited to dive deeper in with all of these questions. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Ethan. Give me 1 second to rewind this. Nithya, whenever you're ready.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. My name is Nithya. I'm the council member for the 4th District right now. I'm an urban planner by training. I used to be a regular bike commuter for many years before I got into a couple of really bad crashes that have spooked me. And now I'm still mostly riding only on totally protected lanes. I also used to be a regular public transit user before this job. And I'm the mother of young twins that walk every day to the school near our home. And I take them riding on bike paths and I take them to Ciclavia. But I really long for the day that I'm going to feel safe with them biking on our streets. So I'm excited to be here and to talk about these issues with this group of people. I think that my approach to the issue of transit safety has really been very similar to some of the other issues that are near and dear to my heart, including the issues of housing and homelessness. And the same problems plague the city's planning on mobility that plague these other issues. We, instead of having a citywide strategy on planning and decision-making around transit infrastructure, we have a district-by-district approach that relies far too much on discretionary approvals by council members, slowing down our processes and needlessly wasting our time. I also think that we don't plan enough holistically. We don't put enough resources in terms of budgeting and advanced planning into these processes to get us to the results that we need to. And so my work on this within the city, in addition to many of the projects that I've been pushing forward in my own district, have really been to push policies like the Raise LA effort that have tried to make substantial amounts of budgetary resources and prior planning available to mobility in the city. And I'm excited to continue doing more of that if I'm reelected.
Thank you. Over to Katrina for our first question.
Thanks so much. Our first question is about the high injury network and Vision Zero. In 2015, former Mayor Garcetti launched Vision Zero. The goal was to eliminate traffic deaths by 2025. 8 years in, we're actually further away from that goal. In 2022, 312 people died on the streets of LA due to traffic violence, and many more were injured, as we discussed before. The city's mapped its high injury network, which are the 6% of streets that account for 70% of injuries and deaths. In CD4, this includes Burbank, Ventura Boulevard, Franklin, Hillhurst, and Vermont. And many of these streets are designed like racetracks with wide lanes and long blocks. What do you make of the city's lack of progress on Vision Zero? What changes would you like to make in CD4 to make Vision Zero a reality? Please list specific streets or projects that you have in mind. We'll start with Nithya.
Yeah, I mean, I think Vision Zero is a really important goal. And what has bedeviled the implementation of Vision Zero efforts has been the challenge that has, I think, again, as I mentioned in my opening statement, has bedeviled so many of our city's efforts, which is that it cannot be its standalone program. Vision Zero goals and Vision Zero processes have to permeate every aspect of policymaking in the city. And we just haven't done that. We've kept it as its own bucket of work and have not integrated it into every aspect of street construction, street repair. The reality is that the most important thing that we need to do is to reduce speeds. That is the most important thing in order to be able to save lives. And to achieve that, we have to use a range of tools. And so what we've been doing since I've been in office has really to be pushing efforts that can do this across our high injury network streets. So we have a motion that has asked DOT to put speed tables along our major arterial streets, which will include many of the high injury network streets that you mentioned. We're also asking them to implement new changes available to us under AB 43 and AB 645, which is the speed camera effort, which I supported, to make sure that we are actually implementing tools that the state has given us to improve safety on our streets in LA quickly and effectively. We also just introduced a motion to change the city's overall policy for signal timings, because that signals are where many of these accidents happen, where people are dying, to make sure that our signal timing policy is really driven by safety for pedestrians, and where walkers are really put at the forefront of how we're doing planning around our streets. For me, I really want to see Vision Zero permeate every aspect of our city's policymaking.
Thanks. And next over to Ethan.
Great, thank you. So obviously the amount of traffic deaths in our city is just unacceptable. And because we are such a car-driven city, it's challenging to tackle these things because all of these changes require trade-offs. And we need to keep community buy-in to help them understand bridging the gap between the status quo and the changes we are making are really in the community's best interest. So I think first and foremost, it starts with a community-focused approach, building relationships with the impacted community, business, residents along these high injury networks, so that as we start bringing in these environmental changes that are absolutely necessary, we don't face opposition from the community, but we actually get buy-in and support. I see a lot of the changes our city tries to make facing strong community pushback, and I think that's really due to a lack of relationship building and a lack of communication and a lack of understanding that these changes really make an impact. Some of the changes I really want to see in other jurisdictions. So I don't know if you noticed this at night, our light system changes where you can get, instead of the sea of green lights, you get a sea of red lights. Other jurisdictions create timing systems that actually incentivize you to go the speed limit. So if the speed limit is 35 miles per hour, if you go faster than 35 miles per hour, you'll hit red lights. But if you go the speed limit, you'll hit greens. These are the kinds of things that prevent someone from jamming on the gas to try to make the next light and speed up on streets they shouldn't be. I'm also a big proponent of making sure if we're having a crosswalk in the middle of a street where there is no lights, to make that a lit crosswalk. I've had to take those crosswalks before that don't have lights, and every time I feel like I'm taking my life into my own. So those are just some of the changes I want to make.
Thank you. Next over to Ternig.
Hi, everyone. Riding a bike or scooter is dangerous in CD4. Around the district, people who depend on bikes or scooters to get around navigate a patchwork of mostly unprotected bike lanes that are in the door zone of parked cars or around delivery drivers idling at curbs. The mobility plan includes bike lanes on Hollywood Boulevard and Van Nuys Boulevard, Ventura Boulevard, Beverly Hills, Sepulveda, Cahuenga East, Cahuenga West, Barham, Forest Lawn, Los Feliz, Hillhurst, Vermont, and Hyperion. Will you commit to implementing a network of safe, physically protected bike lanes in CD4, even if car lanes or parking spaces have to be taken to make room for them? How will you deal with pushback from Angelenos that don't want to give up car space and could never see themselves on a bike? Ethan, you can go first.
Yeah. So again, I think this starts with building the relationships with the community. Every time these kinds of measures have been just implemented, they face massive pushback and ultimately are removed. But there are success stories. And I do believe we can move the ball forward on this, but it starts with community. I also think it makes sense to start in the communities that use bikes the most right now. So the Los Feliz community has, I think, one of the highest bike ridership neighborhoods in the district. And as you mentioned, there's a lot of plans to build out that bike network. So I think a plan that's already been floated, but no progress has been made on it, is putting a bike lane along Los Feliz Boulevard off the street and those wide grass berms. I think it's a great idea. I need to talk to the community about further, but I think that's an easy low-hanging fruit we can make progress on. There's also bike networks that are being built out along Sunset Boulevard with a Sunset for All plan that I think would integrate very well into Los Feliz. And again, these are also communities that have higher rates of apartment living and are really well suited for mass transit, but they need to close that 2-mile gap between where they live and the mass transit we really want to encourage people to take. And so that's where I see putting the initial focus, if I'm elected, into building out that network so we have good mobility options for people in that community.
Okay, Nithya.
Yeah, so definitely very, very excited about putting in a network of safe and protected bike lanes. And actually, it's work that we are already doing in the district. And we've done it on Riverside Drive when we had a resurfacing opportunity there. We did it along Burbank Boulevard. And wherever we have resurfacing plans for roads in the district, we are really looking at those as opportunities to be able to implement the mobility plan. What we did for the Riverside Drive project was that we offered communities an option on how that design would look, but we did not give an option that would take away the bike lanes entirely. We basically told the community we wanted to do this. We did outreach on a couple of different design proposals, and we said, which of these would you prefer? And that was a really, positive and exciting outreach process. And I'm excited to continue doing that work across the district. We're also funding protected bike lanes within Griffith Park. We have $4 million for a broader Griffith Park investment effort, where we're going to be putting those right into the park, where we've already shut down part of Griffith Park Boulevard to automobile traffic. And we're actually already funding a design effort for the Los Feliz protected bike lanes through that $4 million. So I appreciate that you're excited about that as a current constituent, Ethan, because it is something that we're really excited about too. And we're really trying to figure out how to do this quickly and effectively. One of the biggest challenges with doing bike lane programs is staffing capacity at DOT. And I hope that we'll have a chance to talk about that later today, because unless we fix the capacity of the departments to be able to plan for this infrastructure, it will not get built in a timely fashion.
Thank you, Nithya. Now over to Jenny.
Thanks, Taraneg. So we're going to talk about safety on Metro. In 2020, Metro launched a large experiment in removing armed officers from public safety, creating the Ambassador Program. The Ambassador Program's goal is to help riders get to where they need to go and address safety and health issues that come up on the system. The program has been so successful that it's now likely going to be made permanent. Our question is, what do you think of Metro's Ambassador Program? Do you view it as a model alternative to armed police enforcement more broadly? And also, how do you think that we can ensure safety on the Metro system? And Nithya, we'll start with you.
Great. Well, thank you so much for this question. I don't serve on the Metro board right now, so I don't have a direct role over Metro public safety policy, but I think that Metro is doing some good things and can do more to make sure that people are feeling safe on Metro, which is incredibly important, not just because that is something that every resident of Los Angeles should be guaranteed as a feeling of safety as they use our public infrastructure, but also because it will bring more riders to Metro if they feel safer on it. And I think we really need to be talking about how we can move forward on that. The pandemic, I think, created a real crisis in our system. It was a huge break in ridership that created real conditions of distress on those trains. Ridership dropped, and we did see a spike in crime. One great piece of news is that the numbers are trending in the right direction. There's been a 53% decrease in crime across the system since April. And I think part of that has been the new Metro Ambassador Program. That program, I think, does not mean that police don't have to be on the trains. This is a supplemental effort that can be much more pervasive. Those ambassadors are cheaper. They can be across the entire system. And what we're seeing now is that they are actually saving lives. From the latest stats that I read, ambassadors have saved 72 lives on the Metro system already. And I also read studies that show that 62% of riders are feeling safer with the ambassadors around. And so I think, to me, in order to really make sure that we are feeling safe on these public transit systems, we have to do everything to ensure that people are feeling safe and use every tool in our toolbox. And the Ambassador Program is an incredibly important tool, one that I'm very, very excited to make permanent.
Thanks. Now over to Ethan.
Yeah. So I think the Ambassador Program is a good start. It is great not just for visibility on the Metro, but also to help riders help figure out how to make connecting trips and things like that. But I don't see it as the complete solution to our public safety problems on the Metro. I applaud and support Metro's plan to stand up its own police force dedicated to Metro. I know officers who have worked overtime details on the Metro line, And it is just not a good situation when you have people not dedicated to the work, not invested in making improvements day over day, just kind of coming in their extra time. It is good to have a dedicated police force. And this is also important because this is a major transit structure. I mean, we invest heavily in security in our airports, and we need to invest in security in our metro as well. We also need to invest in environmental changes to keep our metro safe. We should harden our turnstiles. Right now, they're kind of a joke. I have forgotten my tap card before and been tempted to jump the line because they're so easy to do. I didn't. But we need to actually make sure that the people riding metro are riders. And this isn't just at our train stations. Our bus drivers are often not safe and do not feel safe doing their job. And tax on metro riders or drivers, has been very, very high recently. And so we need to also be thinking about environmental changes to keep our metro line for passengers and keep it secure for everyone.
Great. Thank you. And now I'm going to pass it to Adrian.
Thank you so much, Jenny. I'll be asking a question about the Sepulveda Transit Corridor. Metro Sepulveda Transit Corridor project is an exciting opportunity to finally provide high quality, efficient mass transit between the San Fernando Valley and the west side of Los Angeles, eventually ending at LAX. Two alternatives are currently being considered: a heavy rail option with a dedicated UCLA stop, and a monorail option that would parallel the 405 freeway. Metro recently released ridership projections, and the monorail would see between 64,000 and 86,000 riders per day, but the heavy rail would see between 107,000 and 121,000 riders per day. Do you support the heavy rail or the monorail alternative for Metro Sepulveda Transit Corridor project?
Is that me? Okay, so yeah, so as a metro rider, I love heavy rail. The Red Line was a great option, and I would love for us to see more heavy rail. Some issues we need to talk about though with both of these lines. With the heavy rail, there's a whole range of options within that, what that actually looks like. I support the completely underground metro line. I think part of some of those plans have the heavy rail going above ground, and I don't think that is good for the community. I don't think it's good for ridership. And I think there's a lot of challenges there. I'm very aware of the drawbacks of the monorail. It doesn't quite have the same stops and has a slightly lower ridership. But here's my concern about the heavy rail line. Metro projects the heavy rail line costing a minimum of $20 million. The metro line costs between $7.5 and $12 million or billion dollars, all these with a B. The metro budget, with all sources from Measure M, Measure R, state funding, local funding, is $8 billion. And no one, as far as I'm aware, has explained where we are going to get the minimum of $12 billion more to complete this rail line. And with how the purple, and another piece no one's talking about is the purple line extension has already gone so far over budget, it's eating into that $8 billion pot we have for the Sepulveda project. So I'm very concerned about us having the same project or same problem that we're having with high-speed rail in the Central Valley, that we start a project that we don't have the money to finish. And I don't see where more money is coming from. So as much as I would personally prefer the heavy rail line, we actually have the money for the monorail line. And I would rather, I do not believe that the perfect should be the enemy of the good. And if we can't secure the funding for the heavy rail line, I'd rather have the monorail line than nothing.
Great. Should I get started?
Yes, go ahead. Sorry.
Great. Well, I think, yes, I'm really excited about the Sepulveda Transit Corridor. This is one of the most heavily frequented travel pathways in the entire country. And I think we absolutely need another option besides car travel to be able to allow Angelenos to get from the valley to the central part of the city and vice versa. I think it's also really important in the context of what we're planning in terms of the housing element, and increase plans for more housing along our major boulevards and thoroughfares, we need to make sure that people who are living in these areas are able to get to where they work. And I think the transit corridor is really important. For me, looking at the ridership projections, it really feels like alternatives 4, 5, and 6, which are the heavy rail options, make the most sense. All of us as Valley Council members have really advocated for underground options the entire way. And I am very, very keen to ensure that we do have a stop at UCLA. We have a lot of people who live in the Southern San Fernando Valley and work at UCLA, and we need to make sure that that really enables them to get there and back. For me, I think I have been a continued advocate for ensuring that we have the option here, which will be the most usable and the most used by riders. And for me, that has really meant looking at these heavy rail options. One of the things that I want to make sure that we understand is that we don't have final cost estimates yet about what these are going to cost the city for any of them, whether it's monorail or the heavy rail. So I want to make sure that we are talking about that cost discussion when we have those final estimates. But for now, I'm very, very excited about the heavy rail numbers that we're seeing, and very excited to continue advocating for this project to be built as soon as possible.
I think I'm next. So wanted to talk about Cahuenga East. Streets LA is scheduled to repave Cahuenga East between Odin and Barham soon. And the stretch of Cahuenga has bike lanes on the Mobility Plan 2035, but doesn't have any bike lanes currently on that stretch. If implemented, it would provide the first way to safely bike between Hollywood and the San Fernando Valley. There's also an ongoing discussion with Caltrans about relinquishing the dead lanes, the old on and off ramps of the 101 near Barham, to the city of Los Angeles, which could then be built up to street level, providing more room for bike and pedestrian infrastructure. So the question is, will you commit to adding valley-bound bike lanes to Cahuenga East between Odin and Barham during repaving? And will you work with Streets LA and LADOT in the future to add city-bound bike lanes on Cahuenga West when it is repaved? And for this one, Nithya, you're up first.
Yeah, well, so we're actually already working on this, which is really exciting. We are waiting on a draft design from DOT for Cahuenga East to look at how we can add bike lanes on those streets. And when we have those draft designs, we'll be able to share them out and talk about how we can actually do implementation. For Cahuenga West, we don't have a repaving schedule yet, but when it is on our calendar, I'm happy to advocate for adding more protected ways for both pedestrians and bicyclists to be able to use these pathways. I have a little extra time in this answer, so I want to talk a little bit about how challenging it's been to actually be able to plan for bike lanes here in the city because of the lack of staffing at DOT. We actually advocated for additional active transportation staff to be added to DOT for the last 2 budget cycles. They have added some, but they haven't been able to hire up the full component of active transportation planners. LA continues to have a significantly smaller number of planners who can do the planning and design work for active transportation investments than any city that is comparable to us. And it's really, really hard to make sure that we're actually making these investments, in part because we don't have the planners to be help us to be able to implement it. And so I think one thing that we have to be very focused on as we move forward is really ensuring that that we do continue to budget for planners who can do this work, that we do it in the context of our resurfacing plan so that we're doing the plans in advance enough, and that we are continuing to advocate for DOT to actually hire up these positions quickly and efficiently.
Thank you. Ethan?
Great. So the Cahuenga East and West corridors are locations that I'm really concerned about. These, for those that drive through these regularly, they are incredibly impacted, not just by the normal increase in traffic, but by Hollywood Bowl traffic. And the Hollywood Bowl season has now stretched way beyond its normal, usual summer months. And those communities that are surrounded by it are faced with gridlock on a regular basis, almost every weekend night for most of the year. And so this whole area, I think, needs to be redesigned with that in mind, whether we look at better mass transit options in and out of the bowl to street redesigns. And I would love for bike lanes to be a part of that. And I think you raise a very good point about the lack of bike lanes over the mountain. So it's definitely something that I would love to include in a redesign of this area. But the overall traffic congestion and impact on the surrounding communities right there, whether it's traffic, whether it's the deterioration of roads because of the heavy traffic, I know Odin's a disaster, really needs to be addressed and needs to have a lot of council office attention to them. So this is a high priority for me and my administration to tackle this bottleneck of congestion and damage to the network. So as it relates to bike lanes, yes, I would absolutely love to integrate that into a larger vision for the corridor.
Ethan, we've got 25 seconds left. Do you want to just say a little more about what your larger vision is?
Yeah. So in an ideal world, I think we need to figure out ways to get people out of their cars coming into the Hollywood Bowl. I think we need to have a better bus network, and also I think there's better ways of mitigating the traffic flows, especially right at the neck and going under the freeway. Yeah.
Thank you. Over to Katrina.
Thanks. The next question is about Griffith Park. In 2022, Andrew Gilmert was biking on Crystal Springs in Griffith Park, where he was struck and killed by a driver. Since then, Griffith Park Boulevard from Mineral Wells to Zoo Drive has been closed to cars, and Crystal Springs is slated for the removal of some car lanes and the addition of protected bike lanes. However, there are still 5 freeway on-off ramps on Crystal Springs, and people still use Zoo Drive in Crystal Springs to cut through the park and avoid traffic on the 5. Streets for All would love to see a future where people can drive to the park, but not through it. Will you commit to ending cut-through traffic through Griffith Park by adding a diverter on Crystal Springs Drive? Will you work with Caltrans to close the 5 on-off ramps on Crystal Springs Drive, and how? Finally, do you have any other ideas on how we can improve the safety of those walking, running, and biking in Griffith Park? First is Ethan.
Great. Yeah, that's an interesting question. Yes, I think I'm open to that idea. I don't know the details of it, and it's really important to know how things actually are implemented. But I think that on its face, it sounds like a good idea. I live right by the entrance of Griffith Park. I use the park regularly, and I want this to be a safe space for us, people on foot, people on bikes, people on horses. And so, yes, I'm very open to working with Streets for All on this idea. And I'd also want to talk, obviously, with Friends of Griffith Park and the Griffith Park Advisory Board to see what their vision is for this. Because ultimately, the parks are for people. And I've been on Crystal Springs before, and I know how fast traffic can move. And I'd also want to see what kind of traffic impact studies there have been. Where does that traffic divert to? What are going to be the impacts there? The thing to keep in mind with traffic flows is it's all a fluid ecosystem. And so being mindful of, okay, if we close that street, where does the traffic get diverted to? How does it impact those communities, if at all? And having a plan to mitigate that. Because my biggest concern is when we make changes that impact other communities, that if they're not on board with them, then we face the kind of backlash we see in other areas, and it's not necessary. But it starts with that community-focused approach, selling ideas to the impacted communities first, getting them on board so we can make that change together. So yes, I think it's an idea I would absolutely love to explore.
Thanks. Over to Nithya.
Yeah, I mean, so I'll be honest that this isn't something that I've considered for Griffith Park yet in terms of totally closing the on and off ramps. So far, what I do know is that Caltrans has committed to reducing the number of off and on ramps in that area onto Crystal Springs, but not to a full closure. But it's certainly something that I would be open to. The big thing that I do want to, so I want to talk about 2 things. One is that I'm really excited about what this $4 million investment with Crystal Springs, how it's going to change Griffith Park usage going forward and safety for active transportation users in Griffith Park overall with this investment. It's going to be, I think, a really transformative change that we had actually already been planning before Andrew Gelmert's untimely death. But his death certainly breathed urgency and life into that work and helped us to get the $4 million from the state through Laura Friedman's office to actually make it a real possibility that we can do quickly. Through that work, we're going to be able to close the bike lane gap on Zoo Drive, which is really exciting. We're going to add protection to Zoo Drive. We're going to add speed humps near the John Ferrara soccer fields, which are really, very dangerous for people to use right now. And we're also funding the design and planning for a protected bike lane on the Riverside Drive Bridge. I did want to say one thing about Griffith Park, which I feel very, very careful about as I'm managing it, which is that Griffith Park is not just a regional resource, it's for the entire city. And so people who are coming to the zoo, people who are coming to use all the incredible facilities, I want them to be able to access it as well. And many of them are coming in on cars because there are no public transit connections. And so that's really the thing I want to balance as we are moving forward on making sure Griffith Park is safer.
Thanks. Back over to Michael.
Thanks, Katrina. So Healthy Streets LA is our ballot measure that would require the city of Los Angeles to implement its own already adopted Mobility Plan 2035 whenever it repaves streets. We spent much of last year gathering over 100,000 signatures to qualify it, including 5,369 signatures from CD4 residents. It'll be on the ballot in March of 2024. At City Council last year, Nuri Martinez led the charge against Council adopting it outright, despite her acknowledgement that the city is moving far too slowly on the Mobility Plan and Vision Zero. As our campaign ramps up early next year, we will be looking to have allies on City Council speak out in support of the measure and work to get their constituents to vote for it. So the question is, what do you think about the concept of forcing the city to implement its own mobility plan during repaving? And will you commit to publicly supporting Healthy Streets LA at the ballot box? And will you personally vote for it? Nithya, you are up first.
Yeah, so I mean, I think I mentioned this a little bit in my opening statement. The amount of discretion that we have over implementing some of our big plans and the way in which that planning is done in our city is a big reason why we don't have a built-out bike lane system yet. And so for me, the goal of Healthy Streets LA is one that I think is important and one that I have supported and will continue to be supportive of. I think what I'm doing in parallel to what the Healthy Streets effort is doing is really trying to figure out there is actually an ordinance that's coming forward through the city. So whether or not Healthy Streets wins at the ballot, we want to make sure that the city's parallel version, which former Council President Nuri Martinez had originally put forward, will be as strong as possible to ensure that whatever happens with Healthy Streets, that we'll be able to have internal legal language that will bind us to the goals of the mobility plan and to really bind us towards ensuring that we're doing everything possible to make our streets as safe as possible. I think that I think there are definitely places where the city can also do better than the mobility plan. Like for some of our valley streets in particular, what we've noticed is that the mobility plan actually doesn't do as much to plan for a strong bike network as it could. And so I'm really trying to think about how we can think about a bike lane network that's funded by the city, that is implemented by the city, that has the staffing to be implemented by the city, but that is also responsive to changes in how the city is growing. And I'm really working on the city side, make sure that we're doing that in parallel to the Healthy Streets effort at the ballot box.
Thank you. Ethan?
Great. I really appreciate the intent and frustration that is driving the ballot measure, because the city just is not doing its part in moving the ball forward on protected bike lanes. That being said, I have some real concerns about how the ballot measure is actually going to impact the problem. So the first issue is because it ties painting bike lanes with repaving, it goes to how repaving is actually done. Resurfacing is done usually 1 and 2 blocks at a time, based on the quality of the street. And it is very common for a 1 or 2 block section to be paved and the surrounding areas to not be paved for months or even years. And just based on the way this is written, to me, it looks like what will happen is you will get a 1 or 2 block bike path with no connecting infrastructure on either side, a bike lane to nowhere. And that'll be scattered all over the city. Second problem is one of the big bottlenecks right now is DOT is in charge of striping. BSS is in charge of repaving, and they don't talk to each other. They don't coordinate, and they often hold each other up. And this measure is just going to, I think, intensify that gridlock. But finally, I see this as really having a risk of mobilizing citywide opposition to bike lanes as a whole. What we're going to see is these small little chunks of bike lanes that don't lead anywhere, taking away parking, taking away lanes of streets in just little scattered areas across the city. And if you think the opposition to an actual bike lane network is bad now, just wait until there's a kind of thoughtless, unplanned chunk that impacts a community, and not just in one community, but across the city. And I think that without actual leadership on this, it's just going to make a citywide movement against bike lanes and set the movement back even further.
All right, over to Jenny.
Thanks, Michael. So this question is going to be about biking to the LA River. As you know, CD4 has 2 ways to bike to the LA River. There is Hyperion and Fletcher. However, neither are safe. Neither are a safe way to actually bike to the LA River bike path. The Hyperion Bridge has no bike lanes, although it is slated to get protected bike lanes when the bridge is rebuilt. And there is no infrastructure at all on Fletcher. The next few questions are pretty personal because I, for over 12 years, have biked on that bridge, and till this day, just does not feel safe. So our question is, will you commit to making sure that not only the Hyperion Bridge gets protected bike lanes when rebuilt, but that also the approach to the bridge in CD4 has protected bike lanes that connect with Griffith Parks and the Marina bike lanes? And the other question is, will you commit to working with CD13, which is Councilmember Hugo Soto Martinez, to add bike lanes on Fletcher, even if that means that we have to reduce lanes for cars? And we'll start with Ethan.
Yeah, so I think as we rebuild the Hyperion Bridge, makes a lot of sense to be building in this kind of infrastructure that's so hard to do once the infrastructure is already in place. So I am very open to the idea of protected bike lanes on the Hyperion Bridge. If we're going to do this, let's do it right. As it relates to the specific approaches that you talk about, I don't know the specifics of those plans. In theory, I think that it doesn't make sense for us to have bike lanes that don't connect to a larger infrastructure of bike lanes. So it's something I'm very open to. I'd want to get into more. I have a lot more questions about traffic flows, about impact, about the larger biking network. But I would absolutely work with CD13 on making sure we have a fully integrated bike lane network to the extent possible. But again, I think it's really critical that we look at community impacts and try to mitigate those as much as possible and really make the community a part of the process, because I really feel like when we drop the ball on that, we set the greater cause of traffic safety, mobility, and accessibility back. So as much as I commit to working on these projects, I also commit to bringing the community along with me, because we all have to be partners in this kind of change.
Thank you. And Nithya.
Yes, so absolutely. We have been in touch with BOE already about trying to improve connectivity to the bike path and to make that connection possible and to make it as safe as possible. And so one thing we've been discussing is really to how can we think about moving basically changing around the repaving schedule so that we have a clear connection that would connect Rowena to Riverside, and then to the bike path. And so my hope is that we will be able to announce those changes very soon. We're already working with BOE on them. And I'm hopeful that we'll have a much safer approach to the bike path than we do currently. And yes, we're absolutely in touch with Council District 13 already on both Fletcher and the reconstruction of the Hyperion Bridge overall. Fletcher doesn't have anything planned as far as we know at the moment, but we have put forward a new motion that will look at traffic planning around the Glendale-Fletcher intersection, which is a very dangerous intersection that I think will also help us to make it safer for cyclists and pedestrians in that area, as well as to make that intersection safer for automobile traffic that's going through it. That was the intent of the motion. One thing that I do want to say overall regarding all of this is that we have really been fighting for investments to the bike path throughout the entire district. I have 19 miles of the river, either one side or both sides in the district. And to me, making sure that we have a straight shot from the valley all the way through on the bike path is a dream of mine that I think we will be able to find the dollars to invest in. And it's something that we've already generated money for from the federal government, and I'm hoping to do more of that.
That's really great news. Thank you. And now over to Taraneg.
As Nithya mentioned, the city takes a broken council by council approach to planning. Additionally, LA DOT, as was mentioned, is persistently starved for resources to do things like community outreach, geometric design, and planning. This results in our city moving at a glacial pace when it comes to things like installing new crosswalks, speed humps, signals, bike lanes, bus lanes, even when enthusiastic council offices request these things. How would you try to change the broken planning approach in LA? And will you advocate for more funding in the budget and positions for LA DOT so we can build out our mobility network much faster? If so, where would the money come from? Nithya.
So absolutely, I would advocate for this. I already have, and I'll continue to advocate for it. We fought for a number of new positions to be added to LA DOT specifically for their active transportation work. All of those positions were moved forward in the budget process. Some of them have been filled, but we're still waiting for more to be filled. So we'll continue to advocate for those positions to be retained in the upcoming budget cycle so that they can be filled out and so that DOT can actually implement projects in a timely fashion, which is a huge, huge problem. I think we actually, given the challenges that we have across our system, across our city family in terms of staffing, we have the money to be able to fund these positions already. I think it's a real question of focus. I've seen the city be focused on staffing up for certain positions and actually have real progress. Crossing guards, for example, was a really, really major issue. And we've actually made real progress on hiring hundreds of new crossing guards to make sure that schools are safe as children go in and out of them. I think we can do the same for active transportation positions. It requires an advocate for them. It requires somebody to be a champion for them. And I'm hopeful that the new head of DOT, Laura Cornejo, will be that champion and will be that advocate. I think one other issue that I would say is that we also need to make sure that we're not just focused on staffing at DOT. We also have to make sure that we are staffing across all of the different departments that deal with our city streets and ensure that we are talking to each other. I've done this work on our housing and homelessness efforts, particularly on homelessness prevention. I've brought departments together outside of the committee structure to do exactly that. And now that I'm on the transportation committee, I'm excited to do more of that convening work in that role as well.
Over to you, Ethan.
Great. So absolutely, we need to staff up DOT. We need to staff up DOT not just for the issues we're talking about, but we have a whole host of transit-related issues that are affecting our city that we have to be ready for, from how we deal with the rise of autonomous cars from Ubers and Lyfts, the Olympics and World Cup coming, and then just day-to-day things like we are talking about now. Something a lot of people don't talk about is we do have the positions open for so many of these jobs. The problem is we have many problems, but one of the big problems is our personnel department. Across our city, the biggest bottleneck to getting good employees is the personnel department, which is lethargic. It is holding up major amounts of hiring, and it takes so long that we are losing qualified candidates to other jurisdictions. And if we want the best DOT engineers and employees, we have to speed up our hiring process or they will go to other cities. And so a big priority for me is to tackle the personnel department, from 911 operators to DOT employees to sanitation workers. We have to hire more. The job positions are there. We just need to get the city out of its own way. And so I think that is the biggest obstacle when we talk about getting the right people to tackle these jobs. One other thing I think is a big idea, and it's something that would take a long time and something I think we should be talking about. The very structure of our city is creating this bottleneck. Like I said, DOT and street services, which is accountable for sealing our streets, they're two separate agencies overseen by two separate committees, Public Works and DOT, and they report to the mayor, they report to city council, and this is very indicative of why we face so many problems in our city across the city. Everything is so siloed, and something I would love to tackle.
Thank you both. So we're now going to go to audience questions. This will be a minute each. I don't have a way to spotlight you both and show a timer, so I will just hold it up when there's about 5 seconds left. And Nithya went first on the last one, right? So this will be for Ethan. So actually our top question is for Ethan, and you can take up to 1 minute. You certainly don't have to take all the time. Ethan, you mentioned in your opening statement that some jurisdictions have traffic lights that turn red when cars are speeding. I've never heard about this before. Can you provide more information on this type of infrastructure and which jurisdictions have them?
Sorry if I misspoke. The infrastructure I have seen is timing lights so that if someone goes the speed limit, it's 35 miles per hour if you're at one light to get to the next light. And so if you speed, you're going to hit a red light. But if you go the speed limit, you will hit green lights, and you are actually incentivized to go the speed limit. If you go any faster, you'll hit a red. So I've seen these in Oregon. I've seen these, I think, in some cities in Northern California. I appreciate that our light system is very complicated and is very heavily engineered. And so I would definitely want to learn more about if that can integrate well into our system. But these are the kinds of environmental changes that I would love to see.
Thank you. Nithya?
Sorry, the question is about the piece of infrastructure that.
Yeah, I mean, we could broaden this too, but it was about talking about ATSAC basically in LA. Like, how can we make it so lights turn red if you're going above the speed limit, or essentially time it so you only get a smoother path if the lights are green? I believe that's the question.
Okay. I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with that particular kind of infrastructure or intervention. I'm very open to utilizing technological interventions to be able to reduce speeds. That's really why I put forward our signal timing motion last week, which looks at exactly the question of how do we utilize signal timing to make sure that we are prioritizing the safety of all users of the streets, particularly for pedestrians and for cyclists, and to make sure that we are utilizing the best ways of intervening, in those streetlights to ensure that we're promoting safety. So it's something I'm very open to, although I don't know the specific piece of infrastructure that Ethan was referring to. Yeah. I did want to say that there is no timer right now.
Yeah, I'm just going to be holding up my phone. I don't have a better way to do that, but I will do this when there's a few seconds left. The next question is about bollards. So the question is, what do you think of flexible plastic bollards? Is there a budget for metal ones? And where would you advocate for them? And I'll just expand slightly on that. The city uses these K71 plastic bollards, which are inexpensive but ineffective in actually preventing intrusion into a bike lane or into a curb extension if you're a pedestrian. And a lot of us for a long time have been trying to get something better than the plastic ones. The city also spends a lot of money replacing them constantly because cars run over them. So Nithya, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, the reality of much of the work around transit issues is that we are limited by budget and timing when we're making those implementations. And so for me, we've used these plastic bollards in the past because that was the cheapest way to do it. And it was the fastest way to get at the outcome that we were going for. And in places where we've used them to create protected bike lanes, they've been really effective. And yes, some of them have gotten run over. Some of them have become degraded over time. So we are actually putting forward a motion over the next couple of weeks, which will look at how we change from these plastic bollards to something that is more permanent, likely concrete. You mentioned metal, open to that, but really trying to figure out how to make these plastic interventions much more permanent as we move forward. But we really do need to make sure that we're also focused on being as efficient as possible when we're making these interventions.
Thank you. Ethan?
Yeah, so I've seen the mangled bollards before, and can only imagine that they don't provide the sense of safety that bicyclists really want. Some top of mind thoughts is I think we would have to be very thoughtful about what we replace them with. I don't know the different alternatives, but I imagine if they become too hard, you need some flexibility. Otherwise, they could become a danger to drivers as well. And we want to balance what is best for the whole ecosystem. So I would be very open to exploring different alternatives. But my sense is the councilman was probably right that there's a efficiency gain to be had with the current system. But if there's an alternative, I would love to explore.
Thank you. So the next question is addressed to you, Nithya. It says, when you ran in 2020, you said that you'd build protected dedicated lanes for bikes. The few bike lanes you mentioned are not protected. Granted, LEOT isn't well staffed, but my question is specifically about the bike lanes you did oversee. Would you ride in the bike lanes you installed? And maybe we can expand that to just what, maybe everyone's not aware, like what have you been able to get done in the district?
Yeah, we have put in some protected bike lanes, but not every bike lane that we've put in has been protected. That's definitely true. But we have put in protected bike lanes along White Oak, along Hazeltine, along Burbank, along Riverside, and we will have protected bike lanes in Griffith Park as well. So we have a number of places where we have put in protected lanes. And yes, there are other places where we weren't able to put in protected lanes. But I think where we have tried to put them in, we've tried to make them protected wherever possible. I think the goal is really to figure out how we can get more investment for these overall. And I think I've tried to do the best with the resources that we have available. And, I'm really committed to making sure that we're doing as much as possible going forward.
Thank you. Ethan, would you like to comment?
Sure. So obviously I haven't installed any bike lanes because I have not been a city council member. But I will take a minute just to talk about a piece of this puzzle I think we haven't been talking about enough, and that is bus lanes. I think we need to have a real conversation about rapid bus lanes to actually make our mass transit system work. And I know that in some places there's kind of a hybrid of bike lane, bus lane together, but ultimately, when we look at the number of people we need to get into out of their cars and into mass transit, I think we need to really look at building out our bus infrastructure, whether that's through bus lanes, whether that's just through more and more frequent buses. And that's another reason I'm a little concerned about the Sepulveda corridor project, is just because it's pulling resources away from buses.
Thank you. Next question is about the Metro board. And Ethan, we'll start with you on this. It says, when President Krikorian, I think it's meant to say President Krikorian is term limited. And let's just say if a vacancy became available, would you be interested in joining the Metro board and replacing his seat? And we can start with you, Ethan.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that I would love to. As a Metro rider, it'd be amazing to have a voice on the structure that I used. And then I also think it's really important. Our conversation's been really focused on Los Feliz and the base Silver Lake area, which is great because that's where a lot of the bicyclists are. But I also think the Valley is underinvested in when it comes to mass transit lines. And as the Valley is going through growth and more development is being put there, we need to make sure that the mass transit infrastructure is there to move people around, because if all we do is infill the Valley and don't put people on high traffic corridors and provide a reliable mass transit system that's safe for everyone, then we're just adding to the gridlock. And so I would love to have a position on the Metro board to make sure that the Valley is getting its resources it needs to be able to grow in a way that is efficient.
Thank you. Nithya?
Well, yeah, excited, definitely would be excited to serve on the Metro board. I will say that I have two pretty large external commitments already. I serve on both the La Casa board and on AQMD as the city's representative on both of these boards. And so, I would love to take it on if it was something that was offered to me, but, I would, I think we'd have to figure out how to allocate that. One thing I want to say is that I do think it's really important for a representative of the Valley to be on the Metro. Right now we have Katie Arslowski serving on Metro. And if Paul leaves, I'd love to have a Valley rep on there. I do think that's really, really important to be able to speak to Metro's concerns in the Valley. So for that purpose, I would be advocating for somebody from the Valley. And if I were to step off of any of these other boards, I'd love to join.
Thank you. There's a question about school safety and mobility. The question is, how would you prioritize creating sidewalks around schools where they don't currently exist? For example, around Sherman Oaks Charter Elementary, and maintaining crosswalk paint. How would you address the need for speed bumps on school streets so cars that are present are driving slower? And I keep losing track of who went first last time, but I think it was you, Ethan. So I'm going to go with you on this one.
Okay, great. Well, so yes, this is definitely work that the city and I personally have been engaged with already. We've seen some really horrific crashes in recent months that have really pushed, I think, the city to focus on this issue. And we have a new composition on the transportation committee, which has also been very focused on school safety, which is really exciting to me. So we have an effort now to prioritize funding for building speed bumps around schools that are facing some real safety issues. One of the challenges with that effort is that because of the way in which prioritization for those schools is being done, it has limited schools in the Valley actually from being able to benefit from this, because they're really looking at density within a quarter mile of it. That's why my motion to put forward arterial speed table efforts, I think, will also help us target those improvements right along schools. So I think we got to use multiple pathways to get at the school safety question, and we're really doing that work.
Thank you. Ethan?
Yeah, I think this question goes to the heart of one of the challenges our city faces. In so many different areas, the city council office directs city agencies and what they're going to do. And that isn't as true for street services and DOT. Now, I appreciate they're trying to do a strategic, high-level strategy for the whole city and be very efficient with their resources. But I do support building larger pools of funds for council-directed projects. Currently, there's a huge list for speed bumps, and each council office has a very narrow band of what they can actually direct into each district. I think it is good to have the strategic 30,000-foot perspective of DOT, but I also think we need to broaden the discretionary ability to do projects.
Thank you. So Ethan, you go first this time. The question is, if elected, do you see yourself taking metro, walking, or biking to work at City Hall? And I'll just say, one of the frustrations we've had at Streets for All is none of the Metro board members, or few of the Metro board members, seem to actually use the system on a regular basis. So,
yes.
Ethan, you start.
Yes, I would absolutely love to go back to taking the Red Line to work. I live by the Red Line. It has a Civic Center stop for almost 5 years. I took it every day. And I would love to go back to that. It is so nice to be able to put your headphones in, listen to an audiobook, and play a game on your phone, and just be in that space coming into work. And driving stresses me out. So I would absolutely love, right now, my current assignment doesn't work very well to take mass transit. I'd love to go back to that. So yes, I'd love to be a Metro rider again.
Nithya?
Yeah, for sure. We haven't been able to take as much public transit as I would like. I used to be a transit rider for my last job, and I took 2 trains to get from, and a bus to get from Silver Lake all the way to Santa Monica. And I'd love to be able to do that again. There is a bus line that goes from near my house to City Hall, which I've taken a few times. The reality of this particular job is that I'm often not going to just one place. And with the shape of the district as it is, it's very, very hard for me to be able to rely on public transit alone to get from one part of the district to another, or from City Hall to a part of the district, because of the challenges with our public transit connectivity. And so I think, I'd love to be able to do more of it. If I'm just going to City Hall and back, it's definitely possible. But that hasn't really been my schedule, given the amount of time that I spend driving around to community stuff. Yeah, sorry, wanted to be honest there with that answer.
No problem. Thank you for your honesty. Okay, so Nithya, go first on this one. The question is about the Mobility Plan 2035 cost and how to fund it. And I'll just expand a little bit. The repaving schedule has continually been cut down due to most of our resources going into trying to help the homelessness situation. And so actually the number of miles that each council district is getting to repave is getting less and less. So really it's a question about funding. We all want these nice things on our streets. How do we pay for them? And I also just want to point of clarification, the Healthy Streets LA ballot measure keys off our paving schedule. So it's just painting differently during repaving. But the bigger question is there's capital projects, curbs cost more money. So how do we find that money in a situation where a lot of it's going into homelessness, a lot of it goes to LAPD? How do we pay for this stuff?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. One thing that I would say is that I'm not sure that it's necessarily taking from transportation projects and going towards homelessness. Much of the expenditure that's come for homelessness has come from a lot of money that's come in for COVID-related expenditures and other things that we've put towards those issues. But I know we have too little money for capital infrastructure investments. So one of the ways in which I've tried to combat this, for example, in bus shelters, is by ensuring that we have dedicated resources for bus shelters coming online through the Raise LA program. So this means that when we get revenues through the new bus shelter advertising program that's coming in, we are actually making sure that that money coming in is going right back to funding street infrastructure, starting with bus shelters, but it can include trees, it can include sidewalk safety and sidewalk repairs. And I think making sure that we have both a long-term plan that's allowing us to do that and a dedicated source of revenues that's committed to it will help us overcome these funding gaps in the future.
Thank you. Ethan? Yeah, that is the big question for everything we want to do as a city, and where we're going to get the money. one thing, this is kind of an indirect answer, but it's something I think a lot about. Los Angeles is our tax revenue is driven heavily by tourism. And Los Angeles is increasingly becoming a city tourists don't want to come to, from our reputations around homelessness, street safety, gridlock. And that is something that's very concerning to me, because if we lose our tourism base, we're not going to be able to fund any of these things. And so one thing that I really want to invest in is we have a collection of tourist heavy destinations: Hollywood Boulevard, Venice, the Hollywood Bowl, the Hollywood Sign, the zoo, that are all kind of being managed independently. We need to have a coordinated response to make these desirable locations.
I was on mute. Thank you. So Ethan, you'll go first with this one. This is a question about the Hollywood sign. So it says there's no safe place for pedestrians, bikes, scooters, or vehicles. Both candidates are aware of the public hazards and safety, but the resolutions are 10 years away. I'm not sure which resolution specifically. How can we get these areas included in this mobility lane? I think maybe the broader question is, the Hollywood sign's really popular. I know there was a gondola proposed a while ago. I haven't seen much on that, but how do we get tourists to one of the, the most famous sign in the world without having this gridlock and inconveniencing residents that live directly below it? Essentially, maybe mass transit for Griffith Park in some way. Ethan.
Absolutely. It is a disaster. I have been stuck for 20 minutes trying to go a tenth of a mile up in this community. And if I had to live up there every day, I would be losing my mind. And also, too, we just have a huge amount of people that are going up there that were unplanned for, that 5 years ago even didn't happen. So this is a really serious problem. And the person asking the question is right. The kind of structural changes we need to make are going to take years to do. It's going to take a lot of work with the community to get there. So what can we do in the short run? Right now, the city and the councilwoman is trying to fill that hole with overtime shifts and things like that. It's the only Band-Aid we really have. But we need to invest in park rangers and DOT to permanently be assigned there. One of the problems with overtime is that people aren't invested in solving the problem. They're getting their check, they're going home. And I've seen this with a lot of the overtime shifts that are happening up there. So getting dedicated personnel in the short run can help us mitigate the gridlock and the double parking and issues like that.
Thank you. Nithya?
Yeah, so I think that this area has been a really fascinating one for me, because it's obvious. So Venice Beach, the Griffith Observatory, and the Hollywood Sign are the three most visited tourist destinations in the city by a mile. But our district gets no additional resources to actually be able to invest in ensuring that tourists are able to get in and out of the area safely and easily without causing impact to the neighborhoods around them. We have tried to manage this with increased DOT and PD traffic enforcement presence in those areas. And we're doing a number of changes on kind of changing around the ways in which parking is managed along those roads and way that people can get in and out to improve the area. But over the long term, I think we do need to invest in a shuttle program that goes from a place that is near a train station, takes people to the Hollywood Sign and brings them back. That's free and advertised to tourists to ensure that people don't have to rely on a private vehicle at all to get to and from the Hollywood Sign. And that's a standard that most countries have. And that's the one that we should be meeting as well.
Thank you. I'm going to resist my urge to answer this next question myself. So we'll start with Nithya. Do you really think Angelenos will use bicycles for transportation rather than recreation? I see plenty of new bike racks in my area, and they are mostly empty. One would still need to dangerously cycle shared space with cars to get to a protected lane or a transit hub.
Well, I think for me, absolutely. I look at my own response to cycling and how I interact with getting on a bicycle here in the city of Los Angeles versus other cities. And I see that infrastructure and the way that we invest in those spaces has a huge impact on it. And so that's really been the premise of my work, both as a policymaker and as someone who is operationally in charge of many things that are happening in my district, is really to say, how can we try and bring the kinds of infrastructure that will make people feel safe and bring them onto the streets in their bikes as opposed to their cars. We've seen other cities that have had a big jump when they've made that kind of infrastructure investment. And I really can't think of a better city in terms of weather to have a lot of cyclists in. So I'm looking forward to a future that looks pretty different from this one. And I do think, given the amount of emissions that come from our transit sector, this is a goal that everyone should be looking at.
Ethan?
Yeah, so I'm a little bit more skeptical about whether we're going to move large amounts of people onto bikes, even if we have more protected lanes. I take the opposite of thinking, where the weather here is hot for many months of the year, and a lot of people don't have the luxury of being able to shower when they get to work. And so I'm a little skeptical of that. Now, that doesn't mean that bikes aren't important for, like, what they call last mile pieces, as we don't have the bus network spreading out, so that between your apartment and the train and the bus, I see there being a lot of room for bikes, but I don't see people taking 5-mile bike rides to work. And so where I'd want to focus is using bike lanes to connect people to mass transit to help solve that problem. And I also don't think the two are necessarily opposed. But this is why I brought up bus lanes earlier, is because if we really want to invest in moving people out of cars, it needs to be in buses.
Okay, I'm seeing multiple questions about sidewalks. So I just wanted to give you both an opportunity, starting with you, Ethan. The Willett settlement, in theory, obligated the city to solve the issue of broken sidewalks across Los Angeles. Like many other things, it's moving incredibly slowly. So I think we all want fixed sidewalks. That's not a good question. Do you want to fix the sidewalks? But if you were in office, or if you get reelected, how would you move that faster? And what is your perception about the city's current progress in fixing our broken sidewalks?
Yeah, so my perception is absolutely that we are not doing enough for them. I mean, just as a lawyer, I think about it as a liability issue, and the Willett settlement is the best example of what happens when we don't invest in sidewalks. My guess is that there is a deeper bureaucratic problems that we need to get past. It's usually, when there's a problem in the city, it's a resource problem and a bureaucratic problem. So the Willett settlement is forcing us to at least move the ball forward on the resource problem. But I don't have a good sense of what the actual bureaucratic world looks like in that. But we need to invest in sidewalks. It is unsafe for our residents, and they're just a necessary part of living in a civilized society. So it's definitely something I want to prioritize in my administration.
Thank you. Nithya?
So absolutely, the Willett settlement has been a frustrating process to follow. Part of the reason why the money allocated through the Willett settlement is not generating large amounts of sidewalk repairs is that whenever the city has been investing in sidewalk repair, every single sidewalk has to be brought up to full ADA access. And so each piece of sidewalk that we're fixing is far more expensive to fix than I think the original settlement even envisioned, in addition to many of the other challenges. We've supported additional funding for sidewalk repair through our budget cycles. We are making sure that BOE is looking at ways to streamline repairs and to make sure that we're fixing issues in the process as we're going through it. But I also think that there's other ways to think about changing rules so that homeowners are more incentivized to make those investments as well, or that property owners are able to make those investments. Other cities have done it, and I think it's something that we can also look into as well.
Thank you. I think we're out of time for audience questions. Thank you all so much for asking them. I'm going to go ahead and put the official timer back on for closing statements. All right, and Ethan, we're going to start with you whenever you're ready.
Great. Well, again, thank you for the opportunity to speak with me. moving the ball forward in transit is very important, not just to me, but for our whole city. If we don't start having a more coordinated, focused approach to the challenges facing us, our city is going to continue to deteriorate. We're talking about upzoning with our RENA numbers and having hundreds of thousands of new units in our city. And those people need somewhere to go, and it cannot just be in cars on our streets. And so, again, as someone who's relied on our metro system, finding ways to incentivize people, to make metro welcoming to people, make it a viable option, really matter to me. I would love to go back to being without a car. I would love to go back to being able to rely on mass transit, not just to go to my place of work, but to get everywhere in the city. And to get there, it's not only going to take resources, it's not going to take time, it's going to take buy-in from the community and creating a vision that everyone in the community wants to be a part of. And so that's where I really think I can make the impact. As a neighborhood prosecutor who's worked in the community, building community consensus was a big part of my job. And I'm excited to work with the very diverse community of CD4 to get it the resources it needs to be the 21st century city it should be. And so I'm very excited about the future. I think we can make huge changes, not just in the Los Feliz area we've been talking about, but I think there is so much opportunity along Ventura Boulevard, along Van Nuys Boulevard, to be building thoughtfully for the next generation and to be building for the future. And that surrounds focusing where we put our housing, how we build our housing, and then how we build out the infrastructure around it. So these are problems I'm very excited to tackle as your next city council member.
Thank you. And Nithya, over to you.
Thank you so much for having this discussion. Thank you for having me today. It was really exciting to answer these questions and to see what people are really passionate about here related to transit in LA. I am really proud of the work that I've already done on building out a better transit system here, a better mobility network here in the city of Los Angeles. Here in Council District 4, we built our first protected bike lane with my leadership. We did our first street closure, I think, in the entire city, where we blocked off a street to automobile traffic for the first time in 2 decades under my leadership. We've put forward real support for things like the Sepulveda bus lane effort. I'm so proud of the operational work that we've done in the district. And we've really taken the spirit of the Healthy Streets initiative and implemented it in practice. Whenever we do resurfacing, we really try and make sure that we're utilizing the goals of the mobility plan as we're implementing those investments across the district. But I know, especially given the time that I've spent already in the city, that we cannot do this simply through council district by council district planning. We have to change the process and the structure through which we are making these decisions and making these investments across the city. I'm so proud of efforts like Raise LA, which are dedicating infrastructure to bus shelters here in the city of Los Angeles for the very, very first time. And efforts like that have come about because of my work and my close work with departments that are responsible for this. Over the next year, we're going to be building 280 new bus shelters here in the city of Los Angeles. So many more than we've built in the last 2 decades. And that's the kind of dedicated work that this issue deserves and what I want to continue doing in my role in the city going forward.
Well, thank you both. I'll just say, I'm just so happy that these transportation issues are being elevated into discussions like this prior to elections. So really grateful for both of your perspectives and time. Thank you to everybody that came out. I see reporters from multiple publications and a huge audience. You both are very popular and everyone cared what you had to say. Stay tuned, everybody. If you want to sign up at streetsforall.org, you can support our work, you can volunteer, and you can find out when we're doing more of these. We're going to have at least 2, maybe 3 before the March election. And whatever you do, please vote. We want to make sure everybody makes a choice at the ballot box. Thank you and good night.
Thank you all. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.